China's been coming up in the news lately and not necessarily in a good light. Ranging from the controversies with the Uyghur and the Hong Kong protest movements, the Xi Jinping regime has seen cracks in its political dominance. But in the past few months, the country has found itself in a deepening quagmire. The coronavirus, a disease that reportedly originated from some Zhang eating raw bats in the seafood market in Wuhan, or perhaps from a secret Chinese laboratory that was breeding biochemical weapons, has been infecting people left and right, killing hundreds not just in China, but globally as well. But while the origins of the disease may never be truly known thanks to the great transparency of the Chinese government, what we do know is that the Chinese government really is aggravating the present situation. The Chinese government failed to inform the international community about the virus from the get-go, while their haphazard quarantine methods rather produced more infectees than isolated them. Not to mention the fact that the lack of proper protocol in distributing valuable resources and material to afflicted areas also increased the confusion and chaos originating from the virus. Such failure to contain the virus at the initial levels resulted in thousands of infections and deaths in countries abroad such as the United States, Japan, South Korea, Italy, Germany, Iran, and so on. And while this video can be one of several thousand that rants about the terrible way the Chinese are handling the situation, this video is not about the China of today, rather about China many centuries ago, a reflection of the global trend of pestilence and disease that sprouted from the Middle Kingdom. The story begins all the way back in the 14th century, when an Italian merchant, let's name him Luigi, was trading goods in a trading city on the Crimean Peninsula. But as he was sailing back home, he didn't notice that the rats that infested his ship were infected with the deadly plague. As Luigi and his fellow merchants anchored on the island of Sicily and started to trade their wares, so followed the rats with their anchors and plague. The disease quickly spread throughout the entire island, then moved on to northern Italy and the trading city of Pisa, and later across France, Spain, England, Germany, Russia, and even as far as Iceland in the far north. As much as 1/3 of Europe's population died. And as Luigi laid down on his deathbed, the sheets stained with the pus and blood from his buboes, the streets filled with plague doctors and burning corpses, he would have probably thought, God has cursed us all. But the truth is, the tragic deaths of Luigi and millions of Europeans wasn't God's curse against the Occident, but rather the result of an anthropogenic migration of death and disease. Johnny Beg, the leader of one of the fractured domains of Genghis Khan's empire, laid siege to the city Kaffa in the early 1340s, the very same Crimean city that Luigi and his unlucky band engaged in trade. When the siege stretched out for years, the tired Johnny Beg basically would have been exhausted, and eventually said, "Screw this, let's end this thing," and he and his army catapulted a bunch of corpses into Kaffa. But these were not ordinary corpses. Flashback to 10 years ago when moved the camera to China, under the rule of the Mongolian Yuan dynasty of Kublai Khan and his descendants. The Mongol conquest of China meant that farming and the economy was in complete shambles, and Beijing, now Kambalik, under the Mongolians, didn't have the power to administer rule to its people. As a result, when natural disasters and disease rocked the mainland, nothing was really done to prevent it. In China alone, 25 million people would die of the Black Plague, and to make matters worse, these sick people didn't stay in their country, but left to other realms along the Silk Road. Mongolian armies with their western conquests and Chinese traders would all go west, infecting Central Asia, Eastern Russia, and the trail of dead bodies and rats and fleas would finally reach the small Crimean city of Kaffa, where Luigi and his buddies would be roaming around the streets, peddling and negotiating next to corpses, completely ignorant of the dangers it posed. And thus, Luigi's misfortune wasn't necessarily the act of providence, but rather the result of an ancient Chinese plague thousands of miles away that spread thanks to thousands of Chinese people leaving the country to other realms. But it didn't quite end there. The fleas and rats and merchants would make a comeback in Europe in the late 16th century, killing many millions and leaving a lasting scar on the continent, while the plague would make a final and deadly third outbreak in Asia in the late 19th century, killing over 10 million people in British India alone, and devastating nearby cities of Hong Kong and infecting places as far away as San Francisco. Now you might be thinking that connecting these plagues of centuries past with what's happening in China is a bit of a stretch, but it's impossible to unsee the uncanny similarity between China and the Black Plague and China and the coronavirus. They not only originated in China, but the mishaps undertaken by the Chinese government were one of the major causes of the spread of the disease worldwide. It's also worth noting how Italy is one of the worst affected regions of such a Chinese plague back in the 14th century, as well as the status quo. Granted, I'm not going to blame Kublai Khan for not creating a center for disease control to prevent the spread of the disease back in the 1300s, because back then they didn't know what a virus was, or any general concept of modern medicine. But what I am blaming is the current Chinese government of the Qi dynasty that refuses to be transparent to the world, failed to restrict infections from moving to other countries and provinces from Wuhan, and somehow has the audacity to blame other countries as being the preliminary causes of the virus. China is a country with literally more than 1 billion people with an incalculable amount of potential to do good things for the world. But if the government supposed to be leading these people resorts to idiotic measures that reflect absolutely no learning from the mistakes of the Yuan and the Silk Road merchants, its people would have to face even more tragedy and anguish, and the world would follow. Good day.